I guess we're going to get started. Welcome to the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission's quarterly board meeting. My name is Keith Gertz. I'm the Regional Director for DEC's Region 4, and I serve as the board chair. As I do customarily, I like to go around the table and introduce the Executive Director and the rest of the board members. So to my right, representing the City of Albany, is Brad Glass. To my left, of course, is Chris Hauver, Executive Director. Continuing around the table is Jessica Otney-Mahar from the Nature Conservancy. And then we have Harvey Alexander, Citizen Representative. Nancy Pearson, Citizen Representative. Continuing around, we have Elaine Balchinian from...
Oh, I'm just a note taker.
Plus,
Patty McLaughlin.
Patty McLaughlin.
Don't pay attention to the...
In my own defense, I have a support beam
Thank you.
that breaks my line of sight there, so... Oh, there she is. Representing State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation is Elaine Balchinian. Representing Town of Guilderland is Don Sapos. Citizen Rep John Bross. So the first order of business is to consider the minutes from the last meeting. Can I have a motion to consider those minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Okay, now we'll open the meeting to anyone from the public. Is there anyone here who would like to say anything? I don't see anyone from the Friends group here today.
No, Richard Naylor is in Antarctica for the holidays, so he's unable to present to us.
It's probably warmer there.
Probably so.
Oh, it's summer there.
Actually, it is something there.
It is something. Okay, moving along, we'll go to reports. I just wanted to let everybody know that the a Ranger Captain for Region 4 recently retired. His last day was a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So we're currently without a captain. Lieutenant Dave Patchen is our acting captain, and we hope to have a new captain shortly thereafter. And also I wanted to introduce Regina Willis. She's over there. She's our new public participation specialist. And that's all I have this morning.
Okay. Board members? No? Okay. I will cover a couple of things, and I'll point to a few things in the update. Is here. If you recall, it's a juried photo exhibit. We had 127. Blake's back there somewhere. Here's Blake. 127 entries, I think, this year. You can see who's chosen as winners, and a portion of those selected out of the 127 submitted are here on the walls. And as in the past, these are for sale. They'll be for sale at the end of the exhibit, starting in March. Is that correct? March 1st?
Second, yes.
March 2nd. Thank you, Blake. Neil, in Neil's update, he talks in his technical committee update. We used to have information in there on Woodlawn and updates on Woodlawn. We're moving that into the update, the commission update that's in your board packet, to give you more of an idea of what's going on quarterly. So that's in there. You can read about that. Joel and Neil have been working with the Friends of Woodlawn in the city of Schenectady to set up some habitat work, which will start next winter. And our communication staff and education staff are also continuing to work with Friends of Woodlawn in the city to promote that site as well. 28 Curry Road, at the last board meeting in September, we passed a resolution to move forward for an appraisal and to make an offer on 2800 Curry Road. If you want to see that, we can. People want to see that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Bear with. So 2800 Curry Road is occupied with carnival butterflies Most likely it's adjacent to property that we own now. There we go. So it's out here in the western portion of the preserve. So we appraised it. We made an offer on parcel A, and we've also now made an offer on parcel B, which is a carve-out, not a carve-out, but it's a subdivision. It's a minor line lots, or a line lot subdivision of this larger property. This is the Baptist Seminary. This is what we call the Phibbs Field. This property is owned by the Nature Conservancy. This was a tax foreclosure that went to the county, occupied with Carter blue butterflies. This is the site that we're working on. This is occupied. In this site, maybe or not. So we've done an appraisal. Title work is in process. The survey was just completed for parcel A 2 days ago, and parcel B, these owners are doing the survey on us. So my expectation is they'll have that survey done probably by the end of the calendar year, so maybe we'll close sometime in January. And they accepted our offer, which is appraised value, fair market value. I distributed this Pathways article. I thought it would be interesting for you to see. It's the publication of the New York State Outdoor Education Association. Sometimes you hear it referred to as NYSOE. Our staff are involved in that. Amanda Dillon, who you'll hear from in our presentation on her later on the agenda. She is our coordinator for community science, which we used to call citizen science. And this highlights our community science program. So this is a statewide thing. And these are out at the front desk. This lists all of our community science opportunities for people throughout the calendar year 2019. Take a look at that. And one more thing, and I won't go in because I'm going long. I won't go into the update specifically. I will say I want to point out two things. Fire this year, we mentioned we were at record numbers for acreage and successful safe burns, of course. For this, back in September, we finished the year at 427 acres. We've never surpassed 400. I don't think we've ever surpassed 300. And then there's another write-up in here that Neil wrote up about a prairie warbler, and I just asked him if he would talk about it briefly after he finishes technical. It's cool.
Chris, you attribute the extra acreage burn to what?
Prep. So we're mowing a lot of habitat prior to that, so we're prepping it. Weather and efficiency with being ready to go. So everything's in place, the plans are in place, burn units are prepped. Island, I have no idea what Long Island Region 1 has done this year. They did some, right, Tyler?
Yeah, they
Brookhaven.
around 100 acres or something like that down there.
Yeah.
And then TJ Carpenter in Region 8 burns, I think he had a couple this year also, like 2 or 3.
Yeah, he burned like 40 maybe.
Yeah.
And that's probably 25% of the acreage that could be burned, given all the buffers and all that kind of thing.
Of the preserve itself, well, 20.
That's pretty good. 1 year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's all right. Tyler's got plenty more to do. So that's all I have. Anything else?
How
Okay.
many acres aren't currently burnable that you'd like to burn?
That's a good question.
How many acres are that we can't burn?
Probably just over a third.
Probably a third. Like you mean because of like invasive species issues?
Right.
Probably 30%. You know, outside that could be that's restorable and could be burned, probably 30%. You know,
And how much of the success do you attribute to the mowing? Because back in the day, they
lot.
didn't really mow. Very little, if at all, right?
A lot. I mean,
Didn't
yeah,
prep the way you do
pre-treatment
now.
has made an enormous difference in how the fire is managed and the size of the burns that we can do now, smoke management. You know, and that a lot of our mowing work is supported by our budget, but it's also been supported by this federal grant that we're working through, wildfire risk reduction it's called, comes to the Forest Service. So we're working through that grant right now. We've done work recently and it's up in the update, and we're applying for another grant. It's not on the budget that we're going to look at because we're going to submit it tomorrow, but we're going to be asking for another 150. It goes just towards that pre-treatment work.
Thanks.
It's interesting that the complaints about smoke from the public have gone way down as well, considering that there's so much more burning going on than ever. So that says a lot too.
Yeah, there's very few complaints. You know, and I think it helps that, you know, we're rigorous with our communications.
Outreach, yeah.
And we're specifically, you know, so for every burn, we're making dozens and dozens and dozens of phone calls. And those phone calls include all 3 dispatch. So you got the city and the 2 towns. So the dispatchers are the ones that they're going to get calls. So a lot of that information stops with the dispatcher, or the complaints, I would say. Not so much of a complaint as they're usually concerned.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah.
All right. Want to hear from Neil Gifford next with the technical committee review.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
There is so much to talk about this quarter. I did prepare for you, Keith, a written update.
And this I can't put on the screen, but it's probably just as well. Probably safer to just follow by paper.
What's that?
I said this I don't have to put on the screen, but it's probably safer.
And the projects that have gotten the most attention from the technical committee and staff are the projects around cross gates in the town of Gilman. Sorry, Brad. Last but not least. There are two that you've probably heard about in the media related to in and around cross gates within the transit-oriented district in the town of Gilman. The rest of the projects in the update are all just updates from before, not a whole lot of change. So we're cross gates. Let's see that. Is that better, John? Cross gates, of course, is here. And one, you know that we had commented previously, and now we've commented 3 times on the proposal, again, cross gates on the apartment building complex that's proposed for partial protection area 57. But additionally, recently, there was a proposal to increase the height of the roof at Regal to facilitate an IMAX theater. And in blue on this map is the Corner Blue Preserve. So this is land that's owned by Pyramid and National Grid that is managed by DEC, with those expenses reimbursed by Pyramid. When in I think it was 96 or 97, initially the site over here to mitigate the mall included just the hill. When the theater was expanded, the protection over there, the Corner Blue Preserve, this blue polygon, was increased in size. In particular because the theater shades this dune that supports, at the time, one of the last 3 sites of Cardinal Blues in the pine bush. The proposal to raise the height of the roof will expand the shadow cast by the theater onto that habitat. The Albany County Planning Board requested a technical committee review and comment on that as part of their comments that we submitted recently, and all of you should have received a copy of that comment letter. They included with their application a shade analysis, so clearly the applicant understood that there were potential issues there with endangered species. The biggest point I think that the committee made is that in their seeker form, They indicated that that the project was a type 2 action, so therefore not subject to seeker and exempt, when in actuality, because it's affecting endangered species, it should have been classified as an unlisted action, not a type 1 that would automatically need an EIS, but clearly it needs some sort of coordinated review. So that was, I think, was the most significant comment the committee made. Conversations that I've had subsequently with the town planner, it looks like they're currently evaluating the town internally is evaluating an initial draft of the EIS for the apartment buildings. That EIS, as a result of public comment on the scope, has been expanded and other related impacts for that entire transit-oriented district, including traffic and so forth. So my understanding is that the town is also considering including our comments related to the theater expansion within that larger environmental impact statement process that's currently ongoing in the town of Guilderland for that whole area. There's some other details that are in the write-up. Pretty much that entire bullet is in italics for you. So I tried including the relevant information, but if you have questions, I will do my best to try and answer them. Harvey?
How many Connors are actually breeding there now? I mean, I was under the impression it's really gone downhill.
The habitat isn't as good as it was, but we have a lot more habitat within the power line corridor itself.
Uh-huh.
So we didn't calculate population estimates for that site, but what we were counting in the power line corridor last year, in total we saw about 100 butterflies. We don't know how many are on the hill within that, what used to be that old fence. There's still some, they're still looping there.
Okay.
The irony of this whole process is that we've been working with the department on updating the management plan for this entire blue polygon, which would include, one of the first things we highlighted, based on the work that we've been doing in the preserve with Joel and stewardship and contractors, is thinning and opening up the canopy, getting more sunlight to the ground, managing it for invasives, and basically expanding looping that's there. So that is 99.9%, that plan is 99.9% done. And I believe recently that DEC foresters were actually out there evaluating the trees for potential thinning. So there's a lot of potential still for that site.
But they are still there.
They're definitely still there, and not only Carners, but of course this whole corridor is known to support frosted elfins, which are state threatened currently, but they are under a 5-year status assessment by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and will probably end up being listed as either threatened or endangered nationally by 2022. Then Hognose Snakes, this is the only site in the preserve we know of where eastern worm snakes exist and a bunch of rare and declining birds, so it's a pretty important site. And it is, as I said earlier, it's the hill there at Cross Gates. Thankfully, that was protected, because at one point at our lowest, we were at fewer than 9 sites and a dozen acres of Carner habitat in the entire preserve. So that site has a lot of history and a lot of relevance to our whole conservation program, and the recovery of the Carners, capturing some females from there, getting those genetics out across the rest of the preserve helped us a lot. And the preserve-wide population estimates for the areas we sample is also in the update this year.
Questions for Neil?
That's a question Steve and I love, Harvey, because it's a really easy question to ask and a very difficult question to answer.
Well, I was just under the impression that the population has really gone down in the last few
It's
years.
down, but they're still there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Neil, can you?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Humor me with the.
Song and dance?
Yes.
Yes,
What's the
sir.
prayer warbler?
Yes, so in your update, I don't know what page it is, it's right under the Carner draft.
It's on page
You know,
3.
we've banded now, Dylan, Steve, and I, and the seasonal science folks, since 2012, around 8,000 birds. And the real value in all of that data that we get, John's way. The value in all that data we get is that we get a lot of recapture. So birds have high site fidelity. They breed here, they come back here. We catch them again. There's we have a fair number of birds that, like prairie warblers, that have done that. What's really uncommon, though, is for any birds that we've banded here to be caught someplace else. So of about 8,000 birds, that's happened 7 times. So in particular, not only that adds a lot of valuable information, but in this case, this bird that was at least, 5.5 years old, ended up, because somebody found the dead bird in Florida, on its way back down to its overwintering location on Hispaniola, probably in the Dominican Republic. We have the full story of this bird's life as a result of our banding efforts, and it's just amazing to think about. So we did this little update of giving thanks for this bird, and others have been found dead. This one died by a window strike. We've had a couple others regionally that were killed by cats. But from this one bird, we learned an awful lot. It's one of the 25 that we put the geolocators on, which I think you've seen Steve present before. So that's how we know, that this bird, you can see the geolocator on its back. They're flying along the coast and then out the Florida Peninsula, ending up in Cuba and the Dominican Republic for the winter. So this little 8-gram bird is what, 20 paper clips?
I had to look it up. 8 grams is 20 paper clips. 4,000-mile round trip 3 times.
Yep, so he's made that
And
trip.
hits a window on the way back.
And we initially caught that, we initially, yeah, right? We initially caught that bird as an adult, so we know it's at least 5.5 years old. It could have been older than that. We just don't know. But the banding data that we do every year tells us an awful lot about the effects of the management we're doing on the breeding habitat. But with this kind of work and with banding, and anybody that finds a bird that has a banding on it can report that. And then we get an email, I get an email to say, your bird, in this case, 40879, was found dead in Florida, and here's all the information that we have on it, so to kind of complete the story. But, so they tell us a lot. It's part of the reason why we're studying birds, to look at the effects of management, because we can learn so much about the impact we're having on this place. So think about the significance of the pine bush, and here we are studying this globally rare ecosystem. Why is it important? Providing habitat to really rare and important species like prairie wolves and Karner blues.
Yeah, it ties us into, a conservation community that's international, really.
Those are tell people
8
that
grams.
these birds that are here in the summer, we think of them as our birds. No, these are all tropical birds that summer here because there's a lot of bugs to eat, so it's a good place to raise their young. But they're here for 3 months, 8 months, they're someplace else.
They're smart enough to avoid this weather as much as
Indeed, yes, yes. But,
Exactly, that's what I was thinking.
Well, it'll be interesting, it's interesting to have this data too, and it'll be interesting to see over the next, few decades how all this changes as the climate changes.
Yeah.
We might get more visitors, the timing
Yep,
of
timing.
things coming
Yeah.
and going may change, so I think there's also some interesting data that you're collecting through tracking these birds for that purpose
Yep.
as well.
And we do, that's the main reason, Jess, we do a lot of the fall banding.
Yep.
And now we've got almost 12 years worth of fall banding
Yeah,
to look at.
that's so
some of
great.
those. Because you could develop a big data set like that, you can start looking at those kinds of changes.
It's really great.
How long does it take them to get to Florida?
Steve, how long does it take a prairie wolver to get to Florida? It's like a Tootsie Pop, it's like a Tootsie.
I think it was like a week down and 2 weeks back, I think. They were faster going down. No, I think it was 2 weeks down and a week back.
Right.
They took their time going
Oh,
down.
that's
and
quick.
getting back.
Yep.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, little 8-gram bird with a 6-inch wingspan.
That's quicker than taking the bus.
They do not migrate in the
Quicker than
bus.
insects.
That's great.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Okay, next with the financial report is Lisa Anthony.
Good morning, happy holidays, everybody.
Morning.
First, we'll start with our statement of financial activities. Everybody has that in front of them. On the revenue side, dues and contributions are slightly higher than budget. And this is due to Trustco increased a bit for this year. Grants and contracts, grant income is 81% of budget. This is directly related to expenses, and we're expense reimbursed based. So our expenses are lower, which you'll see on the bottom, so our revenue is a little bit lower right now. Mitigation fees are $39,000 higher than budget, and this is based on tonnage from the landfill from July through September and year to date. Lease revenue is on budget. Other revenue is $4,000 higher than budget, and this is due to an increase in both merchandise sales and clothing. Total revenue came in at 85% of budget through the month of October, and basically due to lower grant income, which is due to lower expenses below. Moving on to expenses, personnel and fringe are $218,000 under budget in October. This caught up in November with a $200,000 benefit payment. Travel and training is at 54% of budget. This is due to the timing of budget versus actual in all departments. This will catch up throughout the year in all departments. And contractual is $214,000 under budget in October. This was due to $100,000 in federal grant money, which was paid in November, $70,000 in stewardship contractual, which was also paid in November for tree removal, mowing, and stumping. Communications is at 70% of the budget, and this is due to the timing of printing projects, postage for mailings, which will occur in February, and production and fabrication stewardship signage. Occupancy is $66,000 below budget. This is in the Discovery Center. $31,000 is due to a flooring project, and the rest is for repairs and projects as they come up. Supplies and equipment is under budget. This is due to computers that need to be purchased and software and supplies through various departments. And other expenses are at 71% of budget. This is due to some pole banners that have not been purchased. Insurance is coming in a little bit lower, and some merchandise that has not been purchased. Overall, both the revenue and expenses came in under budget through the month of October, with revenue at 85% and expenses at 71%, giving us an operating income through October of $305,000. Any questions? Moving on to the statement of debt assets. On the asset side, cash increased due to an advance from DEC of $656,000 for October through December. Grants receivable is 0, and this is due to payment from DEC. Accounts receivable increased slightly. This is due to mitigation funds that are owed, and this has been paid. Inventory increased slightly. This is due to purchases in the gift shop. Prepaid expenses are $53,000. This is due to a payroll before November that we had to pay in October. This is now 0. Investments increased $341,000 due to a positive performance in all 4 funds, with an investment gain of $385,000 and a transfer to land of $44,000, which will be a new line item below, which I will get to. Capital assets decreased due to depreciation expense and a purchase of a truck. So this is our new land, you will see, is a new line item, which is $44,000, and this is due to the purchase of our Kings Road property, 1017 Kings Road. We will hold that as an asset, and when we receive payment for that, that will come off of our balance sheet. So this is the placeholder for that. Deferred outflows, this is New York State retirement. This is our GASB 68 and 71. And this will change in November. This is the timing of the actuarial report that I received from the New York State retirement system. On the liability side, accrued expenses decreased slightly, and this is just due to the timing of expenses being paid. Deferred revenue increased $475,000, and this is the advance from DEC that I mentioned above. Pension liability and OPEB liability remain the same, and this will change when we get the reports throughout the year. Total liabilities increased $467,000, and this is just due to the quarterly advance from DEC, which will be used over the next 2 months. Net assets, investments, and capital assets in land decreased, and this is just due to a depreciation expense of $154,000, purchase of a truck of $38,000, $48,000 increase in land. Reserved assets increased $9,000 due to temporary restricted colony mitigation. Unreserved assets increased $600,000, giving us an increase in total net assets of $538,000. This is due to a positive operating income of $305,000, a net increase of investments of $385,000, and depreciation expense of $154,000. Any questions? Okay. On to investments. You'll see a new item on here at the bottom called OPEB Money Market. And we transferred $500,000 from our reserve fund into this fund to establish money for our other post-employment benefits. But I'll begin at the top. On the reserve fund had an increase of 5.23%. If you look underneath on the withdrawals, there's the $500,000 that goes to the OPEB money market below, and the $43,000 to land. Discovery Center and the endowment both increased 5.66% and 5.99%. And our new money market increased 0.16%, giving us a change in investments of $385,000. Any questions on that? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda is the action items. Just want to
Sure. So action item A, the first one is the annual plan. The annual plan ties directly into the budget, which follows in action item B. So I provided this, I provided both the draft with the track changes so you could see what was added and what was removed. And then the final one follows that in your packet as well. There's nothing, I talked to a number of you about this, there's nothing substantive in the changes per se. The only thing that's really different is we're changing our terminology from talking about the audience development plan and the vision strategy to specifically the operating plan. Because we're taking all that information that we put together from our work with Shelley Bischoff, remember, a number of years ago, 4 years ago, and incorporating that into a working document that really fits for our organization. And we're going to meet as a staff to go through that operating plan. We've had it in place, but we updated it. The director's team just finished updating it this week. So we're going to go through that. You're welcome to have a copy of that if you'd like. Any questions on the annual plan?
So can I have a motion to consider the annual plan?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
So the next action item is the operating budget and the 5-year Paris report.
This is a little dizzying. Sorry.
Please, guys.
I know, bear with.
Just let me see your packet on the big screen.
Okay, so this is the operating budget that ties into the annual plan for 2021. I've said this for a number of years now. We used to pass this budget with the annual plan in March. Our fiscal year, obviously, as we all know, starts April 1st. As a state authority, we're required to do this now in December and submit this information as part of our report by the 31st, by January 1st. So this budget is, the 2021 budget is based on the appropriation of $2.675 million from the Environmental Protection Fund as flat funding, assuming that our budget remains flat. That's what this is based on. And then further, the second part of this resolution is the 5-year Paris report. So it basically looks at, and I'll run through them for you. The 5-year Paris report starts with our audited financials for last year, our current budget, the budget that we're going to be presented with here, and then a projection that continues out to 5 years. And that's a requirement of the New York State Public Authorities Law, section 28011, which Lisa and I looked up. So I've gone through this with a number of you, but I asked Lisa to put the variance on there so it was really clear. So the big change in revenue here is, so this current fiscal year we're in now, there was a rollover, money that we didn't spend last fiscal year, primarily due to timing and weather. That was contractual. It's habitat work. So DEC, who manages our grant, said, yes, you can roll it over. That's extenuating circumstances. And then we also had we had federal grants in there of $160,000. There's a pollinator grant in there, and then there's also that WRR, Wildland Risk Reduction Grant. That's this current fiscal year. Those aren't proposed here. So there's your primary reduction. Mitigation, we kept flat mitigation from the landfill, but we added 9,000. Lisa mentioned that in her report. 9,000 is the mitigation for the work that you see that's occurring right out front now for that water line. That water line work started a little prematurely and impacted occupied Carner habitat. And that 9,000 is mitigation that was worked out between the contractor and DEC. We're going to be using that funding specifically to be planting and restoring habitat that's adjacent to it. And as a follow-up of that, they're planting all of that, what they're disturbing now. That 9,000 is for a site that's adjacent, not the front. Bottom line, revenue's down $281,000. Most Most of that's picked up in a reduction under contractual work of $253,000. And then there's a reduction down here, which was the truck under capital. So you can see here there's $10,000 this year for capital and $46,000. This is new. That's why this is highlighted in yellow. We thought this would be better. Now that we have OPEB service cost, we're adding this at the bottom. So these are not. This is non-cash. So you end up with a negative number, but remember that's not cash. It's not operating cash. So here's our real number at the bottom after capital, 1414. When you include depreciation, which is a non-cash number, and the estimated service cost of $800,000, you end up with, which shows a deficit of 1053. Patty, you don't have to grab all that.
I did.
Okay. So then this ties in directly to this 5-year, we call it the 5-year Paris budget. So here's last year, here's the year we're in now, this is the one that we're considering, and then we push out 3 more years just based on best guess estimates. So last year, these are our audited financial statement. So the audit that we were presented with in June, this was our bottom number, that negative 427. Again, that's not all cash. That's including that OPEB cost of $840,000, right? This year, that 1044 is tied right directly into this one. That's an OPEB cost of 827, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
827,000 plus depreciation of $264,000. And then the budget that we're looking at this year, with that 1053, ties into that. But again, when you look at this, the format that they use I find is confusing. You know, it's not like we have a choice in that. And it looks a little alarming when you have a big negative number. It's non-cash. That's how I always look at it. So there's the operating budget for this current year and then the 5-year. And I can answer any questions you have. Mr. Brust, any questions?
No, I do not.
Okay. Motion?
Okay, can I have a motion to consider the operating budget and the Paris budget?
I'll do that.
John?
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Chris, appreciate the variances, the variance column. That helps everybody a lot.
That's what I thought. I'm not good with math in my head, so that helps.
Yep.
That's why we do that.
Regarding the mitigation number, do you get a heads up routinely about what the anticipated
No.
tonnage going
No.
in there, or are you just sort of?
No, it's based on, so we're using, we're at 150,000 this year. We carried that for next year. 150 might be a little low for this year because a couple of the quarterly payments have been a little higher. But no, they don't. The answer is no. We just base it on history and what we're seeing. And when we were told that they were going to reduce intake, so we dramatically reduced that. But remember, at one point it was nearly 500,000.
Yeah.
That's when our EPF money was level at 2 million. So the final one here, resolution, action item C. I didn't put this in the resolution. This is coming as a recommendation from the audit committee. So I'll go through it quickly, and if anybody from the audit committee wants to jump in. So we originally set up this OPEB account, which you saw in the new investments, the 4th new account that Lisa mentioned. So this OPEB account, the decision was made to invest it in something that was very low risk. In recognizing that money market and cash was doing pretty well and still is doing pretty well, the idea was let's set up an account, let's put it in the money market. Well, in really looking back and talking through this with the audit committee said, well, wait a second. The reserve account, the way the reserves are invested, that's very conservative. That's fairly low risk. It's cash and fixed income. There's no stocks in it. So the recommendation is to change this account from being invested in the money market to following the asset allocation guidelines for reserves. And that's what's right at the bottom. That's the 2 asset classes. and it's directly out of the investment policy statement that we updated and adopted back in September. So that would be a better return on investment. So that snapshot that Lisa gave you of investments of the OPEB account of 0.16 as compared to the reserves, that snapshot was 5.25, right? 5.23.
Yep.
That's the kind of change that you would hope to see.
By definition, the account is a long-term account.
Exactly.
We ought to invest it somewhere.
Yes, it is a very long-term account. Any questions? Makes sense. Okay.
Okay, so can I have a motion to consider the change in our OPEB investment strategy?
So moved.
Second?
I will. Nancy was.
You can have this one.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the presentations. And first is the development of the new website by Jesse James Creative.
So we have Jim Torme with us. Jim is the James of Jesse James. And I'm going to guess Jim probably doesn't need...
explain that part, thank you.
Yeah, see, and you probably don't need my help with that technology, do you? No. Maybe.
Were you outside making last-minute changes? That would be
No, I was charging the laptop.
Oh, okay.
This is getting
Sounds like,
dangerously
oh my God,
loud.
is he making last-minute changes?
You get like that thing.
I felt sorry for you.
Well, in there.
Exactly. You were stressing me out.
20% power.
Give information to.
All right. I'm going to jump between a few screens here, so bear with me.
Chris, would you like the front lights off?
Turn the lights off.
Front off.
Right.
Yeah. Christmas
Mood
lighting.
lighting for the website.
Wow, ambiance.
All right, so hopefully everyone's seen the new site. We were very honored to work on this and felt the team here was incredible to work with. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of the process and then bounce you through some of the things that we all sort of collectively think are interesting about this. So reimagine the website. The beyond part sort of goes to the brains that I handed out before. A big part of our strategy here was to build tools behind the site to handle and automate a lot of the business end of the preserve. So there's a contact management system in here, CRM, that tracks what every person who interacts with us does. There's a full-on event planning system. So a lot of the things that used to be paper and Post-its and spreadsheets are now all on the back end of the website. So we'll show you some of that in a moment. So I will say this is a before and after for the ages. For anyone who's already forgotten the old site, here's what we were a few short months ago. And the idea, as you've all seen, is to have a much sort of app-driven thing. So it sort of feels like it's very phony. There's a lot of places where information is clickable without having to leave the page, which is a lot more efficient. So we will say it's a collaboration we won't soon forget on many fronts. I'll get into that in a minute. I'll skip the About Us part, but we are located in the city. We are big fans of New York State, born and bred here. And we work primarily with places that have unique identities. So cities, we do a lot with associations and nonprofits. You can see a couple of other New York State clients on the list. But our real focus and our passion is places that are unique. So hopefully you know someone who fits that bill. When we first responded to the RFP, we had visited. I have a son who's in school at ESF, so he's already actually tapped Chris for some free mentorship stuff, which has been great. So as soon as we heard about this place, we knew we had to work on this project. So some of the key things we really tried to do was capture the personality of the place and the passion of the people that work here. That jumped out at us in the first meeting, just how engaged everybody is. We also wanted to design a site that references all of what's happening in the Discovery Center. The old site didn't really show the photography style, the illustrations, none of that stuff, which as we get into it, you'll see we put a lot of that into the new one. And wanted to provide tools to help staff do more of their job, to streamline processes, save some paper, and eliminate redundancy. And one of our big things here, I'll show you the back end very briefly, but admin lives matter. On projects like this, oftentimes the website is the thing and it's an afterthought that people actually have to use it. So we are very conscious about who the administrators are, and these guys were sort of all over that. Which brings us to the players. I don't know who here has ever been in a service business, but we've had clients of all shapes and sizes. From the, I don't know what I don't want until I see it. Is this going to cost me too much? I need it done yesterday. Oops, I was only kidding. But in this case, we encountered the rarest of breeds. Not her. We're talking unicorns. So the kind of clients that keep folks like us dreaming. So this, again, I would say this even if these folks weren't in the room, but this crew was remarkable to work with. So everybody here was creative, they're smart, logical, they pushed us, I think we pushed them, and they were also willing to get their hands dirty. A lot of times we see, especially with government or pseudo-government stuff, we get through the design phase and then the client's like, okay, you want us to actually do something now? I'm like, yes, we do. But these guys really stepped up, and they weren't shy about pushing things. Wendy May talked about that. So behind the scenes, we've got a system that really invites creativity, and in doing a lot of projects with our system, we've never seen a group that pushed this thing so far. Like we would wake up one day and Wendy's like, oh, we realized the project module, if you do this and do a jig, we can make it do this. I'm like, oh, cool. So, but it all worked out, and as we said, they hacked, cajoled, gamed, and manipulated the system to make it better.
How was that lump sum proposal working out for you?
Talk about that another day. So we were impressed, and our team, 201, was equally inspired. As I mentioned, the sort of client from hell slide before, something like this can go terribly wrong or it can go terribly right, which is how this one went. So everything that came up, we were like, oh, that's really cool. We never thought of it that way, or have you guys thought about this? And it was a great give and take. So that being said, let's look at some highlights. I don't know, Wendy, you want to join me for this
Sure.
part of the show? So I'll start with, just for anyone that cares about the geekery of it all, I mentioned the admin lives matter a bit. So this is just what the back end of the system looks like. And like I said, there's not modules in here to handle the contacts, so everyone that's ever interacted with the Pine Bush, including board members, all the way through to people who sign up for programs. And we've got full tracking, so if this person signs up for 3 events, makes a donation, we know everything that he or she has done, and that can be used obviously for marketing purposes later. And one other thing I'll show you, event planning. This was prior to this system, a big process where staff considers a bunch of events. Certain ones make the cut, certain ones finally make the website and turn into things. So now right in the system, all that planning happens here, and at the end of the process, they click the button and it becomes something on the calendar. All right, so that's back-end stuff. So a few just cool tricks in here. We have this slider, because a big part of the story here is like what, as we saw even in today's presentations, what things were and what they can be. So this was sort of one of the best examples of that. Do you want to talk to any of these? Or?
Sure, yeah, I can jump in real quick. I just wanted to mention internally, our team here that worked on the project, it was, our team sponsor was Chris, so he was sort of the overarching person of the project to champion it and help guide us through it.
Kept us on budget.
Working on the visit section was Blake Etchison-Hasty. So she worked on everything sort of under that section, and I'll highlight something in there in a minute. We had Erin Heinel, worked on our Learn section. She's not here today, but Grace Barber worked on our Work section. And I took on the Connect and the Friends section of the website. And then we all worked together sort of on the homepage and a couple other projects. But a couple of the highlights for us, Jim, if you want to go to the homepage first.
Yep.
So we were just talking earlier in the meeting about prescribed fire and some of the ways that we let the public know now about it. And one of the new aspects on the website is our alerts up there. So every day that we burn, an alert is put on there telling people where the burn is happening, what trails it's impacting, and when those trails will be open again. So that's a new tool to help us with that. Also, right there at the top, we have Tell Us Your Story. And we're finding this useful tool, using it several different ways. It's something that we can point users to either show their support for us, they can share a personal connection they have with us, and then we can also use that to send messages to community leaders to let them know how their constituents feel about the town question. So that's a new aspect, people being able to actually give us their feedback. And then we have the basics. I think this was Blake's idea. This was like a compact spot right there on the homepage where people can get like all the top information that they're looking for, or all the top information that our visitor services staff usually gets requests for over the phone. So we have our hours and directions, trail maps, our latest news, and how people can quickly get engaged with their friends. So that's a good thing there. We also, in coming up with what kind of new things we wanted on our site, we wanted a way to convey our new tagline. So we sort of came up with the idea of having it sort of flow down through the whole homepage, starting at the top, yep, it's globally rare. And working with Jim, we thought we'd have a call out, so each one of those little silhouettes with the arrow links to a spot on the website that highlights that particular part of the tagline. So, for example, the middle one, significant, nationally significant, links to a page that we have with all of our designations on it and awards, and so that's a way we can link to that throughout the site. And then finally, at the bottom of the page, we were trying to figure out a way that we could highlight different species in the preserve in sort of a fun way. And so this is a spot where we can do that. These are changeable very easily. I can go in and switch out what animals they are and what kind of information we want to have sort of pop up with them. So that was on the homepage. I wanted to highlight.
Before we leave the homepage, I mentioned staff before, but right here we have this rotation of different staffers. As you refresh the page, you see someone else's fun bio there.
Yep. If you want to go to the visit real quick. Wanted to point out, we now have an interactive trail map. That project was led by Blake, and it's using technology from Esri, which we use for all of our GIS work here. It's a program they have called Story Map, and Blake was able to create this fully interactive trail map. And she has since trained some of our stewardship staff and science staff to be able to go in here and to update it real time with areas of the preserve that are closed for management. So we can have now that real time information going out to visitors, so they can, if they were thinking of visiting the preserve, they can see, if that area of the preserve is closed or not. Under the Learn section, you want to jump there real quick?
Yep.
I mentioned the Designations Awards and recognition page there on the left. So this is a page where we are able to highlight each of our designations. And then we're sort of using this, we're linking to this from throughout the entire site. So for example, if you go back up, Jim, on the left, and click on nature. So right there on the right, you'll see our sidebars. which is a place where we can post any like little cyber information to link back or link out to anything. So right there I can put our national natural landmark designation and then a link back to all of our other designations. And then I just have two more in the our work section. So this under ecological management. So Jim showed you real quick that slider right there. We can use that throughout the site. This is the only place where we have it right now, but some other places where we thought we could use it, or maybe in the geology section or something like that, showing sand dune formation. So there's a lot of different uses for it. But I also want to highlight in this section, Grace did an awesome job of sort of taking the big, huge concept of management in the preserve and breaking it down. So on the left there, you'll see under this page, there's several pages about mowing and cutting, chemical application, planting, prescribed fire, and in each one of those, she has just a quick little thing on the right side there that's the nitty-gritty. So people can sort of browse through and get a quick glance at each of our management techniques. And then last, in the
It's very emotional for some people.
in the connect section,
Where are we going?
the connect section. So in here under our team,
And this is one of our favorite areas, just going back to what I said up front. When we spoke to everybody, we realized this deserves more than what it was before, which was just a name and a little headshot. So for each staffer, and by the way, you friends and commissioners are also in here. And each staffer has this little pop-up that you can learn a little more about Lisa, and then everyone has access to their own sort of mini blog on this, of my favorite things. And this is self-manageable by everyone on the team, which is kind of cool.
yep. And so our staff can use that as much resource as they want to put stuff on there about themselves.
And functionally, just to cut to everything within Friends, so donating, joining, all that stuff is all completely automated and also tied into that back end. So a big thing we notice is that sort of history in an organization like this is important. We want to know that Jim did this, or maybe stopped doing this for a year, and we need to reach out to that person. So that's all in one spot right now.
And then finally, just some future ideas. We have a ongoing website team now that's going to meet a couple times a year just to keep our site fresh and updated. Some of the things that I've already heard staff talking about for future projects are a timeline of the pine bush. Aaron has started this project, and we can do all different kinds of timelines. We can do geologic timelines or bush timelines, so that's something that we're sort of looking at. And then Grace came to me with a great idea of potentially looking into having real-time trail reports from our preserve naturalists. So we have this sort of team of volunteer naturalists that go out and patrol the preserve and report back to Grace, and a lot of it is like really great information about either wildlife that they're seeing or trail conditions. And so she's trying to brainstorm a way that when her naturalists report that, we can have sort of a little live section on the website where people, visitors can see that.
If anyone's wondering all these little red icons, that's because I'm logged into the back end and the front end. So if you need to edit, in this case, this FAQ, you don't need to worry about, oh, where does that live in the admin? You can just click on that link and that will let you edit that piece of content. But that public doesn't see those buttons.
One of the reasons we chose to go with Jesse James was that the admin part of it is user-friendly enough that all of our staff sort of picked it up and ran with it and built most of the site ourselves. So
People are probably, you're probably familiar with WordPress. You hear that a lot. You know, that's a platform that's been used for a long time. And it's really, really hard to deal with. Like, you need to make even a minor change with like a date. It's really, it's not user-friendly. And that's one of the reasons we went with Jesse James when we put this proposal out, because of this platform. Platforms like even I can use it. I mean,
Not saying
I'm telling you, Wendy tried to teach me how to change things in WordPress. I'm like, I don't know.
The biggest thing from our point of view is that this is extensible till the cows come home. There's nothing these guys threw at us or vice versa that we couldn't say, oh yeah, we can do that. And it doesn't become a duct tape sort of Frankenstein monster either. It's very elegant stuff. This will be hopefully around for a long time to come.
Thanks.
Good. Any questions for Wendy or the team? Nice job.
Good job. Chris, we've spoken in the past about there are some constituents out there that we want to get them to see this place, but there are a lot of others that we just want to inform them so they advocate for this place.
That's right.
This does that.
That's what the website is.
Exactly.
Yes.
Really good job at doing that.
I mean, the interactions that I have with people, obviously outside of this office, like say if I'm at the Albany Roundtable, there's people that fit our target markets, like a lot of people interested.
Yeah.
They may never come to the Pine Bush because they don't like, or they have, mobility issues, or they feel that they're not comfortable. But they support us and they support what we do and they think it's incredibly important and they keep up to date basically through social media, and this is a vehicle for it, and Facebook too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when we ask for more money out of the EPA, I think this can support that.
Yep, that's right. Great.
Okay. Our next presentation, Modus Wildlife Tracking System. Amanda Dillon.
All right. Morning.
Good morning.
Switching back, I'm determined to use up the bulbs in these projectors. So.
I like it.
Also, I'm not tech savvy enough yet to use the touch screen. So animals move. This is something we know. They move for a lot of different reasons. They move to go from, a place that they maybe spend the winter to a place where they go to breeding. They follow ocean currents or climates to find areas of high food quality. And sometimes they move short distances. Our carners, for example, maybe we're lucky if they move 200 meters over their entire lifetimes, to birds, which can fly from one pole to the other. And this movement is important. A lot of times we think that the most important areas for animals are where they're breeding. And that is really important, the continuation of the species. But they wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't have suitable habitat in these areas where they're not breeding and in those corridors between those two areas. And so scientists have done a lot of work to study the movement of animals. And we use a lot of different tools to do that. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about each of these in detail and some faults of each of these. So the first one is marking. So marking, sometimes we don't need to mark animals. Some animals have unique coat patterns so that we can identify individuals. And then we can re-encounter them just by observational study. So scientists can go out and look for them and observe them, or we can put up passive camera trap arrays so that we can locate animals and watch how they move across the landscape. If animals do not have unique markers, well, we can give them unique markers. So that's what we do at our bird banding stations. We give the birds federal bands that have unique numbers on them. So we're giving that bird a license plate or a name so that we can identify it. Those bands are usually small. That's this small band here on this prairie warbler. So in most cases, it requires re-handling. So that can really only happen if these animals are encountered by other researchers who set up the mist nets or capture the animals to read those bands. If we, or in the case of our prairie warbler in Florida, we can have the public encounter them, but usually that's not a happy ending. We can add some auxiliary markers if we wanted to, like in this case on this prairie warbler, we've added color bands so that we can identify that individual from a distance. So we don't need to re-encounter or handle that bird in order to find out what its name is. We've done this with collars on wildlife. They've even put paint on animals and then used camera traps at night to study their movement, giving each animal unique paint colors that are only visible from UV light. And finally, stickers. I mean, really low tech. But these stickers are actually, so this is what scientists use to find out where monarchs were migrating to. It's how scientists found their overwintering grounds in Mexico. So the marking works. It's a lot of work by scientists, and it does require that you re-encounter the animal, which might work on a small scale for us when we have researchers out here in the pine bush looking at prairie warblers in the breeding season. But if we want to connect the prairie warblers to where they're wintering or the corridors that they're using to go from their breeding grounds to their wintering grounds, it kind of doesn't have much utility. So the next one is radio telemetry. So this we've been using for years. You put these transmitters on animals. You may remember Beast. She was our 16-and-a-half-year-old doe that was equipped with a radio collar by the DEC in 2002. So you equip these animals with collars that have a radio transmitter on them, and that radio transmitter has a unique signal. And you use a receiver and an antenna, so a Yagi antenna, to locate that signal. It takes a lot of work on the ground. It can be one person that kind of does a lot of walking around to triangulate and pinpoint where the animal is located, or you can have a number of people on the ground with these antennas to find these animals. The problem with this is that, again, it has a limited range. So this is really where we're studying home ranges or breeding ranges. We can't really follow an animal over a large distance with this because these radio transmitters have limited distances that they can reach. They're also limited by the batteries. So scientists are always waiting. We want these teeny tiny batteries that last forever. That would be great. But we're not quite there with the technology. So basically, the smaller the battery, the less time the device works. So some of the smallest radio transmitters we have for animals, we can put on some small animals like smooth green snakes or prairie warblers, but they only last about a month. So again, that's going to really limit the amount of movement that we're going to be able to document. And it's also really labor intensive. So it involves a lot of scientists being out there or a lot of time for very dedicated scientists to follow these animals. So GPS transmitters are a great tool. This is a big step in allowing us to follow animals over larger areas. So these are transmitters that you attach, and instead of using a radio signal, they actually communicate to satellites. And so they get a GPS fix, and you program these GPS transmitters to take a certain number of points a day or to take them at a certain time of day, and it gives you a location for that animal. And they're really great. If you want to spend double the amount of money, you can actually get ones that will transmit that data back to you via a website. But in many cases, you have to recapture the animal to get that GPS tag off in order to download the information. So it does, again, require that we re-encounter the animal. And again, we're really limited by the battery size here. These GPS trackers require a lot of power because they're communicating with these satellites. And so the smallest GPS trackers that we can have right now only last about 45 days. So again, we're really limited by this battery problem with wanting to study animal movement. So these light level geolocators are kind of fairly new, and we put them on prairie warblers. You may remember Steve talking about this. So they're essentially little data loggers. It's great because they don't have a big battery in them, so you put them on here in the breeding season, we let them go, they fly down to their wintering grounds, hopefully they come back, and we recapture them, take that data logger off, and we're able to get the data off of it. So again, requires that we re-encounter the animal, but it gives us an incredible amount of data. These have a small light sensor on them that use the length of day and the position of the sun to figure out where they are on the planet. So really great tool. As you may remember from Steve's presentation, there's a lot of post-processing with this data. It turns out that shrubland birds that spend a lot of time in shrubby areas in the shade, that really impacts those light readings. So it makes the data really messy, and it takes a lot of post-processing to actually figure out where those animals were. You might remember from Steve's presentation, when we knew these animals were here on the breeding ground, we got some signals like way up in Canada, out in the Atlantic Ocean. So there's a lot of post-processing, and it does require that we recapture the animals. And we did find with our research with these birds in particular that putting these geolocators on did affect the return rates. So all of these work to some degree, but nothing's really perfect. And here's MODIS, which is also not perfect, but it's getting a lot better, and it's a really great method for monitoring animal movement. So the MODIS wildlife tracking system is a collaboration of a bunch of different organizations that put these MODIS towers up and use them as a passive array to study animal movement. So this is our MODIS tower on the top of the Discovery Center here, and I talked about those Yagi antennas before with radio telemetry. This is the same thing. They're just giant Yagi antennas. They're 9 feet long. There are 4 of them up there pointed in each cardinal direction. And so what that is doing is animals are equipped with radio transmitters, but they're very, very small because we don't have to worry about tracking them over small areas. These transmitters, they're called nanotags, emit they're on the same frequency, so all these towers can pick them up, and then embedded in that frequency is information about that particular individual. So this program was started in Canada in 2012. It was a project of Acadia University, so it was very small scale. And then it got a real big bump in infrastructure in 2015. It's a program of Birds Canada, and you can see these yellow dots are where MODIS stations are currently located. I just downloaded this map last night, so it's really focused on North America. We are starting to get some of these stations in South America, which is great because that'll help us learn. A lot of our birds that breed here are going down to South America for the wintering months. So that's great, and we're also seeing them start to appear in the Western Hemisphere, the Eastern Hemisphere over in Europe and Australia. So I'll just zoom here onto the Northeast. So you can see when this program started, it was really focused on coasts. And that was one of the reasons it took us a couple years to kind of get on board. This bug was actually put in my ear by our avian field technician, Tom Williams, who thought this was a program we might want to tie into. But at the time, the program kind of hadn't reached critical mass, and I think a lot of scientists were still hoping that the batteries would catch up and we would have a better method. But since I've learned about this program, the number of towers has really just exploded. And you'll notice especially here, actually I'll just zoom in a little bit, in Pennsylvania they have here this, what they call a fence. So basically these are all the MODIS towers. Those little flower shapes are each antenna has a range of about 20 kilometers. And so basically a bird equipped with a MODIS nanotag cannot fly over Pennsylvania without hitting one of their towers. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but here is our station here in Albany. You can see we're kind of ahead of the game a little bit in New York, so we've got some stations over in Montezuma, down at Cornell, and up at Braddock Bay, but we're really kind of ahead of the game here in New York State. So I go up every once in a while and I download the data. So those Yagi antennas are connected to a small computer, and those antennas are working 24/7, 365 days a year. So they're just waiting to detect a signal of an animal flying over that's equipped with one of these tags. And so these 4 bars here are 4 antennas. So the white is usually an interruption in the signal, but it can also mean that the antenna is pointed in a very quiet direction. So antenna 1 here is actually pointed at the Helderberg escarpment. So I believe that it's functioning okay, it's just not getting a lot of interference. And so the computer actually interprets that as interference. But what we really want to pay attention to are these 2 little circles here. These are detections of animals flying over our tower. And in order to learn more, we reference these project names on the left side of the chart there. So I'm just going to go to the website real quick to show you some of the data. The website is really great. A lot of the projects that are participating in MODIS make their data available to the public. And so you can actually click on and see examples of these animals moving across the landscape. So this is an example of 30 gray-cheeked thrushes and 7 Swainson's thrushes. This is actually from 2016 also, so you can actually see the yellow dots popping up on the map as more MODIS towers are added to the network. And we have even more MODIS towers now. So this is the kind of information that we're able to get, without having to recapture these animals and remove data loggers, without having to worry about battery power. We're able to get this kind of migration information. So one of the birds that we detected recently was from this project with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It was a red knot, which is an unusual bird. Certainly not something I thought would fly over the Albany area. I pretty much figured they were coastal species during migration. So really interesting. And what's really cool, especially, is when we click on this, we can actually find where this bird was originally banded. Yeah. So this bird was banded off the coast of South Carolina. This year. So see, if we look at a table, see that this bird was picked up by 4 other Motus towers. So these 2 in May are up in Ontario, Canada. So that's probably when that bird was heading up to the breeding grounds in the Arctic. It hit our tower in August of this year. And what's really interesting and kind of cool, I think, is that that same day hit a tower in Connecticut. So that bird was really booking, definitely on a southward migration. So to date, our tower has picked up 6 species. So we put that tower up in August of last year. So in September of last year, we picked up a Swainson's thrush. That's not completely unheard of. We definitely catch those at our fall migration station pretty regularly. A rusty blackbird in November. This is an SGC in New York. We have documented it in the preserve before, but not very regularly. An ovenbird coming through this spring. Didn't stick around, kept going north. Another weird shorebird flew over, a semi-palmated plover in July. Shorebirds migrate earlier in the year than a lot of our passerines, so that's not unusual. And we got a tree swallow in July, and then finally in August we got that red knot. So we can click on the projects for each one of these. Most of these are projects that are looking at migration patterns and migration stopovers for these species. Many of them, the Swainson's thrush, the rusty blackbird, the ovenbird, the tree swallow, are all out of Canada, projects out of Canada. And then, as I mentioned, the red knot is a Fish and Wildlife Service project. I'm not sure about the semi-palmated plover. So this is a really great program that we've put into. It's really putting us on the map for this project. And we're really kind of a leader in New York State. I mentioned that fence before in Pennsylvania. So that was an effort of the Northwest Motus Collaboration, which is a bunch of groups getting together and trying to facilitate these towers getting built across Pennsylvania in order to create that fence. They're continuing that work into the Northeast, including New England and New York. I spoke with some of the representatives at the Eastern Bird Banding Association meeting this spring, and they are aware of our station, and our station might kind of end up being one of the eastern anchors of the fence in New York State, which is pretty exciting. So it's a very low energy project for us, but puts us on this map for this broader research project, and is helping us learn even more about how the pine bush fits for the migration of many species. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
Amanda, what's the antenna and hardware cost for the station?
All together with the computer, so the computer box and the antennas was probably $1,500 to $2,000.
I'm surprised there's not more private, birders, that's pretty low cost. And some of these folks are so passionate that $1,500 is not a...
I should say ours was a little bit cheaper because we were able to tie right into the power here. If you want to put one like out in a field somewhere where you don't have a power resource, you have to get like a solar panel, and so there's a little bit more involved. We also had a structure existing to put ours on, so it costs more money if you need to build a structure to put the Motus tower on. So that price can vary quite a bit, but yeah, it's low cost up front, and then it's very low maintenance.
Yeah.
Are we seeing if the birds are stopping here or just flying over?
So this is just flyover. I've since learned that Motus towers are really good at looking at birds flying over. They're not so good at looking at birds below the towers because there's a lot of signal interference. And so for us in particular, this program's better at looking at migration. If we want to look at stopover, I'd hoped to use our Motus tower to look at saw-whets, to see if our saw-whets were sticking around in the area, but it doesn't seem like that's the best use of Motus because there's so much signal interference when they're sitting in the pines and in the vegetation. They're just not picked up as well by the towers. So these towers are really more focused on movement, documenting movement. Yeah.
What does the bird have on it?
So it looks really similar to, it looks very similar to the geolocator that we had on the prairie warbler. It's just a little bit smaller, but it kind of does that same thing. It attaches like a little backpack, goes over the legs and sits on the rump.
How long does it last?
It lasts, that's a good question. I think they last a very long time because it depends how often, what frequency you set them to ping at, but I think they last a very long time. I'm not 100% sure.
Man, did you say early on that when we ban or some way, shape, or form on these birds, it affects their ability to come back? You said it affects their retrieval?
We did find an effect of geolocators. Steve, I'm right? Okay, thanks. We did find that geolocators, not the bands, but the geolocators, we found, so when we did that study, we put geolocators on 25 birds and we put just color bands on 25 birds, and we looked at the return rates of those two groups.
Yeah, okay.
And we basically saw an effect of geolocators. Whether or not that's affecting the birds and their mortality, causing mortality, we don't know. It's possible that they just got scared away and they went somewhere completely different and we were able to relocate them.
Yeah.
So we're not sure what that effect is. At this point, we just know that it affects whether or not they come back to the pine bush.
It wasn't like a death, so we got a bunch of birds back then and had the geolocators on them.
Yeah.
They determined a slightly lower rate than the birds without geolocators.
And I should say, I was going to mention, so our recaptures during the breeding season, Neil mentioned, these birds do have high site fidelity. It's high quality habitat, and so our recapture rate in the summer during the breeding season is about 8 to 9%, which is pretty high relative to other stations. But our fall migration station, let's see, okay, got a picture of her. Our fall migration station, it's much lower. So this Tennessee warbler was captured in 2017, and she was a recapture. So we originally banded her in 2016, and we caught her almost to the day and in the same net that we caught her the year before. That was our first migrant recapture, and Neil has been banding migrants here since 2007. So it took 10 years for us to re-encounter a migrant. So it is hard sometimes to re-encounter these animals, especially if you want to study migration. It's real hard to re-encounter them.
Any other questions for Bill? Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, is there any thought to adding some of these presentations that are always so good on the website?
That's a great idea.
No, but there is now. I mean, we certainly could. I mean, this whole meeting is on the website. No, it's not. It's on YouTube. It's linked. It's linked.
Because, I mean, that's,
Can we tease those out? Presentation? Yeah.
That's fascinating stuff. And there's not many of us in this room. It'd be nice to get it out more, or even proactively send it to our constituents.
Yeah.
You know, send an email and say, hey, check this out. We just did this great presentation on X, Y, Z.
I mean, you could link it. You could put a post on Facebook. So we've got over 18,000 followers on Facebook.
Yeah.
You could put something on Facebook and have a link to the website, like that write-up that's in the update that I asked Neil to elaborate on. Neil actually wrote that up on Facebook. It's like, you know, but we could also do links to it too.
Something like that presentation is very good for school systems too.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, yeah. They would jump on that.
Yeah, because it gets more towards the, the lay person, because we do a lot of this, these presentations happen a lot at professional conferences, but those are peer groups. Those aren't, like we said, those aren't the people who might not come here but are really fascinated or supportive of our work and what the preserve
Those
is all
people that
about.
we want to advocate for us.
Right.
I think people would find that just, pretty compelling.
Yeah. Good idea. Okay. Anything else? Good.
Guess we're good. Have a motion to adjourn. Second? None? All in favor?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.